You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show, a podcast for professional pilots by professional pilots. Join Dylan and Max, both with experience in flight instruction, the airlines, and business aviation, as they talk to a variety of industry experts, share stories, and have a little fun along the way.
Hey, it's Dylan here with a little bonus episode to wrap up 2022. We know a lot of pilots are on the road, flying at this busy time between Christmas and New Year's. So we thought we'd put together a few of our favorite stories over the years. Something to give you a chuckle, keep you interested. I put in a few of my personal favorites that I think you're really going to like. Max and I have had an awesome time creating content for you guys in 2022. We're so excited for 2023 and beyond. Thanks for all of your support, emails, flight advice questions, donations, and aviation license plates over the past year. It really means a lot to hear from everyone. We're looking forward to 2023 and beyond. All right, let's get on to the stories.
There's a lot of drama in aviation, and we always had a saying, especially at school, as the prop turns, you know? But the collar on...
Isn't that saying still true?
Yeah, of course it is. But okay. In your case, it's even better because your days flying turboprops had a lot of really good stories. And I just wanted to go down memory lane with you a little bit tonight and some of your best turboprop adventures.
Okay.
But we'll go wherever you want to go. I should say you had King Airs, you flew Medevac in the PC-12. Didn't you fly night cargo in like a twin Cessna?
That was pre-turboprop, yeah.
That was
turbocharged.
Was there a turbocharger involved?
Yeah, that you set the mixture by the glow of the turbocharger through the louvers in the cowl.
It's a visual mixture setting procedure.
Okay.
I like that.
Did that? I can't remember if they taught us that in every riddle. I can't remember.
I think that's in the Cessna.
Yes,
manual.
the best way to determine the stoichiometric ratio is by the color of the turbo.
Cherry red.
That's right. All right, tell us the King Air Mexico story. Yeah.
King Air Mexico?
Yeah.
Okay. So as you had said, I flew cargo in the middle of the night out of New Mexico for a while, and then got my big break. Finally was gonna fly something that burned something besides 100 low lead. And
something with engine instrument gauges that you could set the power with.
Yeah. I'm not sure what torque really is, but yeah, it looks, a lot of gauges. Looks cool. Got a job flying King Airs, and the course was as green as it gets, right seat, just, so excited to be there, but as green as it gets. And of course was been there a week or two and get this trip, which is going down in Baja, Mexico. And we're going to land on a dirt runway and drop these passengers off at a little whale watching airport, little whale watching village. And this runway is this little dirt road in this town. And of course, these passengers, the owner of the company had donated these trips to the Boys and Girls Club and done a Boys and Girls Club auction. So of course, these passengers are going to be, non-experienced with small aircraft.
Right.
And, private travel. But they're super excited to go watch these, whales come up into Baja there. So I'm super excited for the trip. I don't think I've ever been to Mexico at this point. And so, show up super early to the FBO, and the other pilot rolls in, the captain rolls in about a good hour after I do. And he proceeds to, tell me he hasn't been down to this airport either, but, we're just going to grab the lat long for it. And, he heads into the pilot lounge, comes out with a scratchy piece of paper, and, I don't know any better. And, nothing out of the norm. Passengers show up, and, we get on the airplane, King Air 200. We head down, or flying down into Mexico. And, we get down to with Mazatlan Center there, and, they clear us direct, and we, type in the lat long and the, I think it could literally have been a KLN 90B GPS. King Air 200 days. And we're cruising down, and we've been told, it's a dirt runway, and it's on the west side of the Baja Peninsula, about halfway down. So it's kind of looking about right. We're cruising in, we start descending in, but the airport we're going to is on the east side of the peninsula. And we come up to it, and we overfly it, and it's paved. It's kind of, broken up pavement, but it's not dirt. But there's I will remember this forever. There's a yellow Nissan Xterra midway on the runway, and it drives off. I'm like, oh, perfect. That must be the transportation for the passengers. And of course, you're making excuses for why everything doesn't quite add up.
Yeah, whales migrate up the Sea of Cortez all the time. No big deal.
Yeah.
They just go to Rocky Point for a cocktail and then turn.
Exactly. And there's so many things not adding up after the fact. But of course, I'm the green guy in the right seat, just there to, flip the gear and talk on the radio. And so overfly the runway, turn 90 degrees, enter the downwind, turn base. And as we're turning final, all of a sudden, one of the things is these power lines just go zipping under the airplane that we had no idea were there. And just catch, one of those just yank back on the yoke.
That wasn't written down on the napkin, huh?
Yeah, it was.
Airnav.com didn't have a briefing on that?
The Baja Pilot's Guide?
No. Yeah. It was probably in the Baja Pilot's Guide. And then, of course, that kind of throws you off for a second. Then you just kind of drop the nose back down. And all I remember about that point forwards, I remember the power lines, and then I remember the wheels touching down. Again, I'm just in the right seat, as green as it can be. And I remember the wheels hitting down, and I was both realizing we're landing on like plants or vegetation or something. And the props are literally chopping through plants, which happen to be a bunch of marijuana plants, we later come to find out. And about halfway through rolling down this runway, all of a sudden you see something on the left side jump out of the way, which happens to be a person. And then we hit a giant, call it a 55-gallon trash bag, which was later to be found out full of marijuana, which goes through the left main tire and gear, just goes right through this bag. So we go rolling down the runway going, oh my God.
This guy's just making minimum wage, minding his own business, harvesting these crops.
And here comes a Kinger landing on his farm. Well, it's about to get a whole lot more interesting because as we're rolling out, all of a sudden we see driving outside the kind of airport area, and there happens to be a little barbed wire fence separating this, is some type of armored looking vehicle, I will call it. Now, granted, my imagination's probably making up, is probably just a Jeep or something, but all I remember, there were guys hanging out with guns. And we are both looking at this truck driving at us on the outside of, let's call it the runway, on this dirt road. Dust is coming up, and there are guys literally hanging out with guns. So we roll out to the runway, and all I remember is the captain yelling, flaps 20 and, this and that, and, set the trim. And he's just whipping the airplane around in a 180 and just firewalling it to take off the other direction. And all I remember is looking at this truck paralleling us on the runway. And there was a turn in at the other end of the runway where they could kind of cut us off and get on the runway. And I remember looking back out that little round window, sitting in the right seat, you could look into the cabin. Yeah. And of course I see all the people back there and looking at this, Jeep with armored guys and, guns hanging out. And we out accelerate them and rotate back up into the air. And I'm just waiting to hear like gunshots on the airplane. And everything's okay. So then as we rotate, the captain is yelling at me to get on my BlackBerry, because it was my BlackBerry days, to text the chief pilot and get the correct lat long to the right runway. Which we successfully did and made it to the other side of the peninsula. We were very close. We were just on the wrong side. And landed at the correct airport.
What do the passengers have to say?
So when we were making the 180 on the runway, I was looking back at that window to look where this, these federales or who they were hanging out with guns.
You were going to hold up, were you going to hold up the metal can, like the maintenance logbook he uses as a bulletproof shield? Flaps
those
20,
things had a lot
shield
of
me.
purpose.
They're flanking.
Probably be a good use. But I looked back at them and I said, I don't think we're at the right airport. And they go, I don't think we are either. And they were literally in tears. And
Oh my God.
it was probably the worst bid they ever made at the Boys and Girls Club
That's
auction.
the best. Oh my God. Wait, so then you had enough gas to get back after all this shenanigans?
Yeah, we actually weren't very far away. We were just literally directly across. I think it was like a, 15-minute flight just over to the correct airport, which happens to be.
Wait. The question that begs to be asked is, where did the chief pilot get the first set of coordinates from?
Well,
did you ever think about that?
Yeah.
Is this old
I was
shorts
gonna-
parked behind the hangar
Yeah.
that no one knows what it's for?
I don't want to. So it was one word in front of the airport. So I don't want to give too many details here, but it was the airport was 3 words. And if you took the first word out, it was the other airport we went to. So it was one of those just, you type in Google and, oh yeah, that sounds right. And it was just, one of those pronunciations where just one more word.
Now,
changed.
did you go back and do a beverage service on that intermediate leg? Try and get a tip.
So the story continues though slightly is we landed at the other airport and we had another King Air going down there. We had given away, I guess, 2 of these trips. They went on the same day. So there was another crew down there with another King Air. So we land there, passengers all go off. We're all just trying to regroup. Well, we're also looking at the airplane and realizing that the left landing gear is absolutely just packed with pot. That's how we realized it was pot at that point. And anybody that knows the King Air landing gear, you got this de-icing system. So you got this, big line coming down and you got all this, de-icing, tubes going everywhere. And there's just a fair amount going on down there. And it's just packed full of this green pot. And of course, we got to go back and clear customs at Brown. And
The dog comes out.
The dog just dies as he's walking
Brown.
out.
So all of us are down there and we are finding like pens, and the other crew had like a Daub kit. They're pulling out toothbrushes and we're sitting there, like Fuji bottles of water trying to like wash out this landing gear so we can then go clear customs and hopefully the dog doesn't come out.
Can you imagine the
and find
custom
back
guy
there.
walks up? Don't ask, sir. It's been a long day.
Listen, buddy.
But I did happen to take a picture of this, which was probably the best thing. And I have a great picture of the left landing gear of a King Air 200 just full of pot.
Now, did you fill out an ASRS report after this?
Wait, are you able to share? Or can we post this picture?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't see how it incriminate. I mean,
Okay.
what's the difference at this point?
Perfect. All right, we will post that on our social media. That'll be incredible.
Okay.
And I mean,
I'll send it.
the quality of these BlackBerry cameras is really stunning.
Yeah, don't look for much over like a megapixel or something.
He'll take up. Oh my gosh! And this is within the first month of you being at this job.
Oh, weeks, like just weeks. Yeah.
So you go back and clear customs, and then they didn't say anything.
No, we easily clear customs, no issues. Yeah, went back, and I think the disclosures were made where need be. And
what did you tell your chief
there.
pilot? Like, did anybody say anything?
Not that I know of. It was one of those deals where you come back and you don't hear much of anything. It was
what happens in Mexico stays in Mexico.
Yeah. I also think we bent a pair of props on a King Air by getting a little too low to the ocean. So it was a good operation.
It's Wild
Wow.
West.
Excellent. We'll have the name of that operator in the show notes.
Yeah,
so
link
you
to
can
their
reference.
web.
Looks like they're hiring actually, so it might be a great opportunity for young airmen looking to build some flight time. Oh man. Well, I think that's good. You have more stories, but we're gonna have to save it for later because I don't think we're topping that one.
Yeah,
That to me
that's
is
just-
the ultimate. Have you? Now I got a question for you. Have you ever told that story in a job interview? Tell me about a time.
Tell me about
you
a
and the
time you've been
captain-
chased by a Unimog full of.
No.
What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you see a yellow Xterra?
I'll leave that one for my shrink.
Oh, man. Someday, that'll be an incredible story to tell in a job interview sometime. You have to think of some really enlightening revelation you had.
A good teaching moment that came out of that one.
Me too, you better time.
Spin it.
Yeah. When you're teaching your kid how to fly one day. I had a KLN 89. A lot long.
Do you even know what that is?
Yeah, there's something to be said for KLN, the KLN 89 pilots.
What's actually miraculous is that you're able to twist in with the knob the new lat long by the time you cross the peninsula.
We were good at that stuff back then. I mean, I couldn't do it to save my life today, but back then we could do it.
Unbelievable. All right. Well, thank you for really putting yourself out there and being willing to share your lessons.
Time for a quick break from the stories to mention our longtime sponsor of the program, Harvey Watt Insurance. They are, of course, the largest provider of loss of medical insurance providers for professional pilots around the globe. Visit harveywatt.com to check out all of the coverages they provide, not just loss of medical insurance, but also life insurance for pilots. It can be harder than you think for a pilot to get life insurance, but Harvey Watt has almost no exclusions for the policies they offer to airmen around the globe. harveywatt.com. Thanks for your longtime support. All right, back to the stories.
Ken, before we let you go, we love to wrap up every interview with a story. I'm sure you're not going to have to think too hard to think of a good story. I know you've already told us about 10 stories, but any good final stories you have for us before we let you go?
Well, one of the most comical things that ever happened to me in prop dusting, and if it can happen in a spray plane, it's happened. You just name it. There's been guys that have taken off the load hose still hooked to the airplane and drug the pump all the way down the runway into the air. But I still have my little Cessna, and it was back before GPS, and so we're dropping flags. And I had just fired my loader because it was the end of the season and we just didn't have much work. And so, we're all creatures of habit. And my airplane had a flagger on the right wing, and you could load the flagger with a speed loader and put a full rack of flags in pretty quickly. But without my regular loader helping me, I'm doing everything right. I've got a load getting pumped into the airplane. It needs gas, so I'm fueling it. And my flagger needs flags, and my windshield needs to be washed. And so I'm doing all these things at the same time, which is never a good idea. So I jammed a whole rack of flags in to the flagger, and I flipped the lid shut, but I didn't latch it. I was going to come back and do that. And, of course, with everything else going on, I forgot and never did go back and latch the lid on the flagger. So I get out to the field, and I make my first pass, and it's very hilly where we fly, so it's a lot of positive, negative G's going over and across the hills. So I get to the first big hill, and I push negative to go over the top of it, and the flagger lid flies open, and half of that rack of flags just goes poof out of the airplane. Out of the flagger box, dumps them all on the ground. So now I'm just pissed off at myself that I forgot to latch that lid, and I've got to go back to the airport to fix it. And I'm talking to myself all the way back to the airport, which was a 12-mile ferry, and I catch this flash out of the corner of my eye, and I look, and the half a rack of flags that was left in there are being sucked out one at a time, and they're just going poof, 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 poof. And I look back, and as far as you can see, there's flags floating to the ground across the highway, across houses. Left a breadcrumb trail. By the time I got to the airport, the whole rack was empty and gone. So, and I just started laughing. What else can you do, right?
Yeah, at that point. That's pretty funny.
Follow me for a good time. Oh, man. Well, this has been really interesting, Ken, to hear a little bit about maybe some of the lesser known corners of aviation. If we have a lot of younger pilots that listen to the show, instructors and guys that are getting their licenses, and gals, if they wanted to get more information about crop dusting, do you guys have a trade association? What would you recommend as like the first step that
go on our website, the NAAA.com. That's the National Aerial Application Association. And there's actually information on that website for people looking to get into becoming a crop duster, or aerial applicator is the politically now correct term.
Aerial flag dispenser.
Ken, have you ever considered starting a YouTube channel?
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe you should be the one with the podcast.
A lot of my friends have told me I need to write a book with all my flying stories.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah, no kidding.
You know, we've only touched on a few of them here. I've got 17,000 hours flight time. And, I mean, I've had 7 in-flight emergencies and cover everything short of being on fire. So it's been an interesting run for sure.
Okay. Well, I guess that means we should save Ken's phone number for later.
I got it. Don't worry.
Max, we received a message from the listener who's on the line right now about a story about my least favorite airport in the entire world, which I mentioned a few episodes ago, the Heber Airport in Utah.
Very tough.
Like all the people there, do not like the airport. And then our friend here mentioned that he had a story about Heber of his own.
Yeah. So I heard your podcast and you're lamenting about Heber City, and it conjured up this vivid experience. And one of these frustrating ones where something kind of crazy happens and you think back and you have no idea how you could have done it better. But so December 2013, we flew into Heber City the night before, had a good dinner and everything up in Park City, kind of was enjoying the whole experience. And then on the way out, I don't know, mid-morning, and uncontrolled field there in Heber City. And there's a designated calm wind runway. The winds were calm. It was a blue sky. Snow had fallen a few days prior. And so it's kind of that, in the summertime, you get a mirage out in the desert, but in the wintertime, you can kind of also get a little mirage when
right.
There's like just this like crystalline blanket of snow kind of off, out on the distance. So anyway, we started up making our CTAF calls and everything and making sure everybody knew where we were as we were taxiing from the FBO out to depart.
What kind of airplane were you in?
It was a Citation 10.
Okay.
Yeah. And
perfect for those short, high altitude runways.
Yeah, especially when you're doing a transcon out to Teterboro, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is what
Perfect.
we're doing with, 4 or 5 passengers. But I don't know. That's just what you do in the business, right?
Right.
And
when you have APG, it always works out.
Yeah, you got APG, so it's all good.
Shout out.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'd done some uncontrolled flying, all throughout my career. And one of the previous operators' technique was whenever like crossing a runway or at an uncontrolled field, we just always turn the TCAS on right from the start. So we can kind of have a picture of, especially if nobody's talking. And this is before ADSB
Right.
was a thing really, right? So anyway, so we taxi out to the runway, we're making our calls. One thing on the way out to runway, I think it's 22 there in Heber City, there's some hangars that are really close to the taxiway as you're going out to that runway. And so there's some guys with this old warbird, I think a Yak or something, that were out there and they actually had to like push the airplane out of the way so that we could get by, right? And they're just not used to a lot of large airplane traffic there. And anyway, so we take the runway and we've got our clearance and everything. We're making all our calls. And as we line up, I look down and the last thing I kind of remember this thing when I'm recalling this was I saw a truck driving on the highway down by the reservoir, which is off the end of the runway.
Right.
And kind of a little like wavy mirage thing. So we had power rolling down the runway and kind of right around 80 knots, right in that little zone of, your first kind of decision point. You start to see kind of a little blob where that truck was, but you couldn't make out anything of what was happening. But that was kind of the first thing I noticed. And then about 10 more knots or so go by, and I just kind of mentioned to my co-pilot that day, like, are you seeing? And she said, yeah. And within a few more knots is this vivid silhouette shape of a Baron. It's like those posters of aircraft identification, and they show you the silhouettes of the airplane, how far out they are and stuff, right? So it's like, here's the silhouette, like, oh, there's a Beech Baron, and it's coming right at us. So at that point, we were kind of rocketing right towards V1.
Wait, hold on. So was the Beech Baron on the runway or in the air?
They were on the runway, rolling on the runway towards us as we were on our departure roll.
Like Tenerife style.
Oh. Right. So there's only, at that point, if we had aborted the takeoff, we're going to be on the runway, and then they might abort the takeoff. And then we're still kind of, doing like bumper cars, with our tiny little airplane tires below us sliding around, right? So that didn't jump into my head as a viable option. And so I just kind of made the decision that my performance is probably better than theirs. And so we just kind of rotated early and broke ground. And I look down and I see a Baron go right, in the corner between the cockpit window, right before it goes out of sight. And I could see two people, kind of right in the windshield go below me. And they're airborne at that point too.
Oh,
yeah. So we both basically rotated at the same, and then I guess we just won with the, getting higher. And so, one of those, it happens. You don't even have time to really think about it yet, right? Or like talk about it. It's just because, we're flying the airplane. So, gear up, got to 1,000 feet, got our first flap retraction or whatever. I don't know, I haven't flown that airplane in a while, so I can't remember the specifics of the profile. And then we just hear this, sorry, on the radio. So I kind of jumped on there and said something like, well, we didn't hear any radio calls from you. And there was another little tail dragger that was transiting the area that we saw fly over us as we were taxiing out. And he got on the radio and goes, oh, yeah, I heard the jet. And then this guy, he just said something else. I don't really recall the specifics, but. So,
he didn't give you a phone number to call?
Right.
Did you ask him to land and meet you in front of the FBO?
Yeah.
For a meeting?
We have this is a live leg. We had passengers in the back, so I kind of glanced back there. They're they're none the wiser. And so we kind of climb out on our way, and then once we got up at altitude and everything, we got on the sat phone and called back to our ops, told them kind of what went on, and then the person I was flying with called back to the FBO. Kind of told them what happened, and they said, oh yeah, the guys that had the Yak Warbird ran over to the FBO saying what happened is Baron just came like wing down towards our hangar, kind of, basically caught in our wake and fluttered out, and then, ended up climbing out in their other direction. And so I mean, both of us, it wasn't a good deal for either airplane involved, right?
Holy cow.
Yeah.
So
anyways.
Yeah. So let's, when you first realized that was it actually an airplane coming in the opposite direction at you, and then you said you rotated. I mean, was that 2 seconds before you pulled back, or was it were you staring down the barrel of a gun for a few seconds waiting to get the speed up, or how much time was that?
I mean, there was a potato. Yeah, there was kind of a
like a potato in your underwear.
Right. Yeah. It was. And so when we broke this down after the fact, we figured on the jet plate, you can see, the altitude at each end of the runway, right?
Yeah.
And so I can't remember which ones where the slope is. I'm thinking the runway we were departing to has a downward slope.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what works best for the departure and for APG and all that. But there's also what you don't see on there is there's a crown. So our safety department representative went back and kind of broke all this stuff down after the fact and said, if a Baron was at the other end of the runway with how tall a Baron is, you wouldn't see it from the numbers of the far runway. But that's not, I don't know if we would have caught it looking at the facility directory or anything, but it definitely wasn't noted on there. So it was just one of these things where aside from them making their radio calls, there's no other way we would have known they were there because they didn't have a transponder on. So we didn't see them on TCAS. I mean, I guess even on the ground that might not have registered anyway.
Right.
So the FAA, we filled out an ASAP report, which is something we added on operator, which was cool. The POI got a hold of the airport manager. They tracked down who this was because the FBO knew who it was, being that, the witnesses ran into the door right after it happened. I guess the story was it was the owner of a Baron taking it down to a maintenance shop to get some avionics maintenance. Who knows what that was? And had an instrument time builder in the right seat. So they were probably just talking away, right? What they were going to do this whole thing, and just never heard any of our calls. So yeah, kind of a spooky deal.
Holy cow. Now I'm guessing the rest of the flight was completely uneventful on the way to Teterboro.
You would think, right? This was also, I looked into my logbook, and it was the last flight, December 18th. So it was my last flight of that week-long rotation before going home for Christmas, that year.
Yeah, right.
And actually, I think it was my last flight that year, right? And so we're on our way to Teterboro, and the whole Northeast is one of those kind of gusty, clear blue sky, but, winds howling in the wrong direction for every airport out there.
I've been there.
And, and I don't recall what direction it was, but it was a crosswind. And that came to light on descent into the arrival as, we're coming down through the low teens, still around 280 or 300 knots. We had just pulled the power to start decelerating. I think we did 12,000 feet, go to 1,200 feet a minute or something to try to target 250 knots as you hit 10,000. And
right.
Kind of right as we pull the power to idle, we get a ICAS message for rudder limiter fault or failure on that airplane. So essentially, the rudder its travel is now limited in this position. And the way those airplanes work, right, is the rudder, the faster you go, the rudder travel is limited more, right?
Right.
So that you can't overpower and overstress the tail of the airplane. So in our situation, it failed at a high speed, which then gave us a crosswind limit for the landing, which 10 knots or 15 knots. I don't know. Some citation guys can look that up. But it made it to where we couldn't land at Teterboro, couldn't land at White Plains, couldn't land at Newark with the crosswinds that were running there. And so we ended up having to divert up to Stuart Newburgh. And so now we're back on the phone, coordinating transportation and all the stuff for the passengers.
Jeez, what a day! And then you had
I bet you proceeded direct to the Sea Caucus Embassy Suite happy hour that evening, huh?
Yeah, it was like the Hilton Garden Inn up there, Hilton Garden in Orange County or whatever that one is, right next to the West Coast Choppers shop that's up there.
Oh man.
It kind of just went straight to the little hotel bar and said, "This is it. Not going anywhere else tonight."
Stared into the abyss. Yeah. Oh man. I've had a couple things happen on takeoff where I salute you for your discipline, because it's so easy. Like if something abnormal happens, it's amazing how easy it can throw you off of like, oh yeah, get the flaps up or get the gear up. To be able to keep the present of mind to continue flying the airplane.
Those
like
are some
like
of the longest moments
Yeah.
too of your life. Like I remember we were taking off in Telluride, and it was windy, and we're in the G3 and we're blasting off, and pretty normal takeoff, and we get to 100 knots and the airspeed just stops, just sticks there. And Telluride, you fall off a cliff at the end.
Yeah.
And this is pre-EMAS days too.
Oh.
And I remember that, like, I don't know, it must have been a second and a half or whatever.
Yeah.
That it just stagnated and you're barreling out of the runway. That's just the longest moments of my life.
Yeah.
Just like,
there's nowhere to go there.
Well, I guess we're going to run it to the end and pull. And
do you know, speaking of that, do you know how below VR you were when you lifted off in Heber?
No, I mean, I think I was probably within 10 knots. The airplane was accelerating pretty quick.
Yeah. Well, the good news is that Citation has a real straight candy bar wing, so it wants to fly.
Right.
It's ready to go.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is we were, it was a cold weather day. So you're at altitude, but it was cold. And from there to Teterboro for that airplane really we weren't maxed out on weight and gas, So, I mean, we did have some excess performance to get above, which, I mean, we had just enough because there it was right below.
10 degrees, it could have been a different story, huh?
And then did you fill your application out to the majors the next day, or did you do it on the positioning flight home after that?
All the above. Yeah. I mean, it was, you write up the ASAP report and the safety report, send it to the company, and then you kind of like copy it right over to your interview story folder.
Right, exactly.
Tell me about a time folder.
Yeah.
Tell me about a time you played chicken with a piston. Oh, man. What a story.
So, as far as Heber City versus Salt Lake, I agree. There's much more
another point for Salt Lake, huh?
Everything involved for Salt Lake City.
Great people at Heber.
And, luckily that was a beautiful day. We didn't have to de-ice or do any of that stuff. So otherwise, everything should have worked.
That's the thing. It's the things that you can't control.
I can't wait till the guy that flies a 550 for a mining company calls in and be like, "You guys complain about Heber. Why don't you try flying to the Democratic Republic of Congo, bro?"
Right.
Or the People's Republic of Congo. Also crazy. There's two.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Was there a yak on the runway?
Yeah.
Right. Animal or airplane, or maybe both. Oh, man. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to share this story. I don't know what else we take away from it.
I don't know what else to say.
Yeah,
we're glad you're still with us.
Yeah. And that's where we were at the end of that flight, was just look back, go, okay, I think we did everything right that we could have done, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, but hey, that's what it is. You do everything you can so that when the unknown happens, you're able to react and deal with hopefully only that and not other stuff that you should have prepared for.
And that goes back to your incredible training at the Harvard of the Skies Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, the sponsor of this episode. And then what we need to do is we need a little music, and then we need to play it, and then have you say in a really cheesy voice, go, I learned about flying from that. Well, thanks for taking the time to call in. We appreciate the story. Let's take another time out to remind you about all of the incredible educational offerings from our friends at Advanced Aircrew Academy. They are the one-stop shop for your flight department to remain educated, safe, and aware out in the ever-changing, dynamic, and exciting world of business aviation. You've heard their subject matter experts come on our show, and you know that they create content that is relevant and engaging for professional pilots. aircrewacademy.com. On with the show.
We love to end every interview with a story. You said you flew the 727. You've been in business aviation. You got to have some good stories for us. So what do you got?
Oh my gosh, I have so many stories. I've got scary ones. I got funny ones. Okay, so I'll give you one that. So we mentioned the ability of using humor. So I use humor to get myself through some challenging situations. So I try to explain to my students how best to use it, because in an emergency, the last thing you want to have is some sarcasm and some sort of humor interrupting the situation. But so I'll give you an example of a scary situation, and humor kind of helped us out. So I was based down in Dallas for a couple different times, and we were going from Cancun back up to Dallas, and this is in the winter time, kind of in the season change, and they were experiencing thunder showers and mixed with snow. Just a really unstable day. The 727 is known for holding static electricity, interrupting the communications, and so we're getting vectored around for the approach. The approach is getting lower and lower. We're expecting an approach to minimums, and I can see a little bit of lightning off. We're in the clouds, but I see a little flash here and there. So I see it on the radar. Nothing, gigantic, but just unsettled weather. Well, sure enough, we take a direct hit by lightning, and so instantly, and I'm the captain, but my first officer is flying back. So instantly we're back on needle ball and airspeed. I take over flying again, and my flight engineer is back there cussing up a blue streak, trying to figure out, exactly what we've got, because there really isn't a checklist for this. All of our generators popped offline. Our avionics were trying to come back on, so everything's flashing. ATC lost us off of the radar, so they thought we were goners. So we kind of ran the checklist as best we could. We were getting vectored around. So in the meantime, the lead flight attendant is back there just wondering what the hell is going on, but our intercom's not working. And he finally figured that out when he's picking it up, trying to call us, and nothing's working. So we're getting vectored closer, and we're concerned now. We don't know what systems are going to be working. So I'm like, well, you know what? All we need is gear. So let's just get the gear out and make sure that that's going to operate. We're close enough. We shouldn't have to worry too much about the electrical draw. I'm trying to get one generator back online. So all this chaos is going on, and you can just see the terror in everyone's eyes and the strain and the stress. And now I'm faced with tuning an approach on a minimums with just needle ball and airspeed. We're not talking to ATC. So we're overloaded at the moment, right? So we get ourselves in a condition where we can remain flying, but all of a sudden now the lead flight attendant is pounding on the cockpit door. And it's the last thing we want. We've got the gear down, we're just about ready to shoot this approach, and we just didn't have time to deal with it. So I looked back at my flight engineer. I said, tell him to come back later. We're doing the dishes. And without taking a breath, my flight engineer puts on the best falsetto voice and yells through the cockpit door, come back later. We're doing the dishes. And the flight attendant, he didn't say anything. He just went and sat down. But that one little moment kind of reaffirmed to the lead flight attendant that we're okay, we're busy up here.
Yeah.
He heard the landing gear come down, so he kind of should have known not to interrupt us. But they're sitting back there in the dark. We've got emergency emergency power on. So just a fun story. So everything worked fine. We got on the ground. The poor mechanics had to go back and trace all the lightning entry and exits and trace all the systems back. And yeah, it kind of ruined their holiday. But yeah, always made for a good story that I could share about using humor at the appropriate time.
That's funny.
You know what you should have done? Like that co-pilot you had, you should have looked over at the captain and been like, I've never shot an approach in actual before. This will be great. All right. Last thing before we get you out of here, Dan. You already told us one story. Do you have any other good stories for us from your contracting days? And I don't know if you want to tell us, did anyone try and offer you payment in anything other than US dollars?
Well, I mean, I did have somebody try to offer it in pesos. I mean, he kind of like laid cash out on a table. Like, the only thing was missing was a briefcase. I'm like, no, man, I need American dollars. And can you write me a check? I mean, the cash was just a little sketchy, but I delivered an airplane down to the Dominican Republic once, and he just laid a bunch of pesos on the table. I'm like, I mean, this is great, man, but I have no idea how much money I'm looking at. That's the problem. You know?
1 million pesos.
I forgot about that one. Yeah. But there was that. There was some other. A lot of the stuff that I can think of are actual flying stories, like actually flying the airplane, not necessarily.
That's all right. We'll take any story.
Yeah, we love it.
I mean, it's not the best story in the world. I've had engine failures and single engine stuff in the past, and had to work with angry farmers in the wheat field. But I can think of one time we were coming back from San Juan in Puerto Rico. We were in a G4, and we had an issue with the pressurization controller going out. And we were up at 41. Let's see which direction we were going. Yeah, so we were up at 41 going east. Do I have that right? Wow, the basics. My goodness.
Yes.
Yeah. We're going
east. That would be correct.
What level 410? Yeah, okay. All right, we're on the same page.
We're fact checking.
Here's my rate, folks. I'm available. Swear to God, I know what else.
Typical airline guy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's right. So we put the pressurization controller in landing, and all of a sudden the door seal started making funny noises, and we started losing the cabin. But we got it down just fine. It was a slow loss of differential. And we called maintenance, and they said, yeah, you might have a controller going out. Do a couple of engine runs, see if you get good pressurization. And when you come back, just come back not in the 40s. Come back in the low to mid 20s. Put on some extra fuel. And all we were doing was going from San Juan back to Fort Lauderdale. So we did. We did exactly that. Well, we found out something else wasn't working on the airplane. About halfway there, it was middle of July, about halfway there, I'm looking on the radar, and we're kind of in and out of a little IMC, and the guy I'm flying with says, looks good to me, look good to you. I said, man, something's weird. It is the middle of the summer in Florida, and we are seeing nothing on the radar. Doesn't that sound a little bit fishy to you? I mean, you sure you got your thing turned on right? Yeah, man, I got the thing. The gain's where it should be. It's in auto. It's fine. Right about that time, we flew straight into a thunderstorm, and we got struck by lightning. We got thrown up about 90 degrees. A yaw damper kicked off. Obviously, the autopilot, the flight guidance computer went to hell. I mean, everything just got zapped. And he was flying that leg, and I remember him sitting down. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the G4, but you have the pitch trim and your yaw damp right in between your legs underneath the yoke there, and he's just going back and forth, punching both. Just back and forth with his index finger. And I'm like, man, that's the definition of crazy, expecting different results. But he goes, I'll never forget it. He goes, I'm going to need you to fix this. Because he had his hands full. And I'm like, well, I don't know what that, all I had was this display controller. I said, I remember in ground school, this is very early on for me. The instructor at CAE told me that in the sensor page, the boxes have to make an L and a P with all the sensors there. And if anything's out of place, that's your first go-to is to make one of those letters line up again. And all the G4 guys will know what I'm talking about. But I remember going to that display controller, and my eyes were bobbling up and down in my head. And I remembered one of the boxes was misaligned and not making the P correctly. And it was the flight guidance computer. And apparently it had kicked off and it switched over to number 2. But sometimes you've got to swap them back and forth and hard select them to get them to come back. And so I swapped it back and forth once, and it realigned everything. I got the yaw damper back on, the autopilot back on. We started flying straight again, and immediately started asking for ways to get out of what we were in. But, Florida, going into the coast, they're not so much help. So we were pretty much riding it out. So just because one thing is broken on the airplane doesn't mean there's not a second thing broken. And it wasn't, I was expecting to catch hell from the passengers in the back, and they were walking down the stairs and says, "Man, you didn't miss any of those potholes on the way in, did you?" I said, "No, ma'am, not one." And we got a call back for another trip. It was surprising, but we figured we were done. But yeah, lightning struck the radome, zapped the FGC, and then it came out the flap. So we had to, I guess they had to replace the left flap because it had a big hole blown in it, and they had to replace the radome and the radar, which was definitely dead now because the radar got zapped as well. But yeah, the radar wasn't working. That's the moral of the story. Sometimes that thing just ain't working.
Now, did you up your daily rate after that? Did you tell me you're charging double?
No, I was actually thinking of lowering it so I could go out and find some more work. Hey, I go through thunderstorms, but I'm cheap.
Full speed ahead.
Let's take one last break to think about a story you could be telling your grandkids in the future about the smartest financial decision you ever made, calling our friend and certified financial planner, Tim Pope. Tim's been helping professional pilots nationwide create and execute a smart financial strategy. Timothy P. Pope, your financial planning partner for all phases of your financial flight. Check the show notes for a link to book your free appointment with Tim and write the first chapter in your financial success story. Okay. Back to the stories.
You're talking about stories, and back many moons ago when you just said Jepp update, that reminds me of something that was horrifying at the moment, but really funny to look back on.
Okay.
It was a leg from Columbus to Salt Lake City, westbound, so probably a 4-hour leg. It was the start of a pairing, and it was my first leg back after a vacation and something or other else, and anyhow, I hadn't flown in probably 5 or 6 weeks. And so when I walked in, I think I retrieved 4 Jepp updates from my mailbox, something else we don't have anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of them were big fat ones. And I said, okay, no problem. I checked the chart change list to make sure that there weren't any for the departure airport. And I said, I'll do them on the way. And we get going and we're up in cruise, and I've got the logbook on my lap as a table. Being an Airbus guy now, I think back and go, my, how crude that was, but it did the job. So I've got the manual open, and I've got a stack of paper to go in sitting on my left, and I've got the heap of paper that's come out to my right, and some of it's on the center console and some of it's on the floor behind the center console. And it is wherever it is, as I've probably removed and inserted 500 sheets of paper by this point, 2 hours in. And the flight attendants have finished what they were doing in the back, and they called up and said, "Hey, do you guys want a break?" "Oh yeah, man, I'd love to come out and go hit the lav." They did their thing, and they set up in the back as they do. And being the gracious captain that I was, I let the FO go first, and he was a new guy, and he didn't think to look and make sure everything was secure. And this was in an Embraer 170, which had really, really good airflow up front. And every time you opened the door, you had a rush of airflow moving to the back, which was nice because it meant we never smelled the forward lav, and we never smelled the galley. But the downside of it was that any paper that was loose and sitting on the console or sitting on the floor was going to end up in the galley when you open the door. And that Jepp paper being very, very lightweight stuff, he opened the door and whoosh, everything went. And fortunately, it was the stuff I was done with. It wasn't pages that I needed. But I realized what's going on. I'm like, dude, just get out. He's out. The flight attendant's in. We closed the door. And when I got up 5 minutes later to take my half of the break, we realized that the paper had made it back to like the third row of the passenger cabin, just, in the air and then drifting down the aisle as it went.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. I just could picture sitting in like the first row and seeing the FO walk out the cockpit door and just the cloud of paper.
It must have been something to see from that side, because, from what I saw on my end, it just blew out all around his lower body, as he enthusiastically opened the door, and it just picked up the heap of paper that was sitting on the floor right in front of it. Yeah.
Ta-da! It's good. Well, we all love to end our shows on stories, so that was perfect. All right, George. Well, speaking of stories, we like to end every episode of our interviews with a story. And I'm guessing with your extensive aviation career, you've got some good stories for us. So any come to mind you'd like to share with us?
Well, probably the funniest story, although it wasn't so funny at the time. I was flying F-4s, and we were ingressing the target, and we're on the tanker, and we get air refueled on a tanker, a KC-135, and we're flying formation with the tanker. And while you're on the tanker, the airplanes in the foreship of F-4s cycle on and off the refueling boom. And when you're not actually taking on fuel, you're just in formation. And that's when I would typically do what I would do before every strike mission while I was in flight. And that would be, I would eat an entire roll of Tums and drink my canteen, because I had a canteen of water. And then I would use what's called a piddle pack, because the F-4 did not have a relief tube. It was called a piddle pack. It's a plastic bag with a sponge inside, and it's a portable urinal. So I would drink my water, take my Rolaids, my Tums, and then pee. Now, using this portable urinal, or using a relief tube for that matter, isn't so easy when you're strapped into a jet, when you're in an ejection seat, you're wearing a parachute, have a shoulder harness, a lap belt. So I had to loosen all those things so that I could unzip my flight suit from the bottom. And I loosened my lap belt, I loosened my parachute harness straps, I unzipped my flight suit and filled my piddle pack, and then I stowed it in the little area to the left side of the cockpit. There's an area where you can put stuff. It swells up to about the size of a football once you've filled it with, and the sponge expands. So I did that. I zipped my flight suit back down, and we ingressed the target. So we rolled into the target. We roll in formation, in close fingertip formation, 4 airplanes. We're using laser-guided bombs, and the lead aircraft has the illumination gear on it. So we all roll in, we drop our bombs, and then we have a 4G pull-off. So at the time, I weighed about, I'd say 150 pounds. So as we pull off, leads laser is guiding the bombs, and we pull off in formation, and I was in excruciating pain. I let out a scream, and my backseater, Bob Wedberg, said, "What's the matter?" I said, "I've been shot in the balls." And then it occurred to me, I haven't been shot. My body had shifted. I had forgotten to tighten my parachute straps, and my testicles had gotten trapped between my parachute harness and my body. And now with 4 Gs, this 150 pounds body is pressing down with 600 pounds of force on the family jewels. So now I know what I have to do. I need to unload the aircraft and adjust myself. So I push forward the negative Gs, and I reach down and I try to adjust myself, but I'm getting further and further out of formation, and Mother Hanoi is rushing up at me at 500 knots. And so finally I just grit my teeth and I pull, and I get back in formation. We get back on, as we are departing the area, I turn the airplane over to my backseater. In the F-4, in the Air Force F-4, there's a stick in the back. I let my backseater fly the airplane, and I was in agony. So I land, and I immediately go to the flight surgeon's office, and I tell him what happened. And he says, "Okay, drop your shorts." And he says, "Well, I heard you guys had big ones, but this is a new one on me." And I look down. My testicles were swollen to the size of oranges. So he says, "Okay, bed rest for the next 2 weeks. You cannot go up. You cannot get up for anything except you can eat and you can go to the bathroom. Other than that, I want you flat on your back for the next 2 weeks, and we'll see what happens." So I stayed on my back for 2 weeks, The whole time I was on my back, I kept thinking about that stupid joke we used to tell when we were kids. You know, the one about the kid who goes into the malt shop and he wants a sundae with nuts, and the clerk says, "Do you want your nuts crushed?" And the kid has some wise guy answer. So finally 2 weeks goes by, and I'm feeling well, and I go see the flight surgeon, and he clears me to fly. Well, about 2 months later, the flight surgeon comes down to the squadron. He's got a big smile on his face, and he's holding a magazine in his hand. And it was Aerospace Medicine magazine. And he says, "You made me famous." I said, "How's that?" And he opens it, and he shows me an article he had written about this 27-year-old pilot who had had his testes crushed and this and that. And I read the article, and it talked about this strangulation injury to the testicles that might have required removal. I said, "You mean castration?" He says, "Well, I didn't want to scare you. I didn't want to make you worry, and everything turned out okay." So, just to put a fine point on that, I have 3 healthy children, so the equipment works just fine.
Well, that is quite a story, George.
Oh man, I don't think that one's ever going to be topped. That was excellent. All right, that's going to do it for some of our favorite stories. Hope you guys enjoyed this little bonus episode as much as we've enjoyed interviewing all of these fine folks in aviation and hearing their crazy stories. We're so excited for 2023 and can't wait to hear from all of our listeners in the coming year. Remember, if you ever want to get in touch with us, you can shoot us an email, info@215podcast.com. Visit our website, fill out the anonymous form, or hit us up on the socials. And as we start a new year, remember, flexibility is the key to air power. See you in 2023. The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.